Hello everyone. As part of this course, I wanted to give you some perspective on the business of sales management and more broadly, management itself. Much of this work is based upon work that's been published by Rita McGrath and Ron Swenson. Much of what we teach today as state-of-the-art concepts in sales management have connections to the past. And a brief review of the history surrounding sales management will put you in a better position to comprehend and apply today's concepts. So let's first begin with the business of management. Of course, business has been around for about as long as humans have walked the earth. And for most of that time, the idea of management really didn't exist. Sure, you had business owners who did things like hiring and coordinating and controlling, but these were not tasks that were somehow identified as management. There were some organizations like the military and the church that were quite large and probably gave birth to many managerial practices out of necessity. But these were ad hoc and not planned. Some of the very earliest thinking on management is credited to a guy named Adam Smith. Now, he was a Scottish philosopher, and he wrote one of the first books on capitalism. He had the insight that division of labor would increase productivity. But then came the Industrial Revolution and everything changed. The Industrial Revolution created the new means of production, and through this, organizations gained scale. And it was this thing, the scale of organizations, that made owners dependent on others. It was this dependency that created managers. The focus was on specialization of labor, standardized processes, quality control, workflow planning, and rudimentary accounting, all driven to promoting and facilitating mass production. Now, by the early 1900s, the term management was in wide use, and Adam Smith's ideas came into their own. There were others that began to develop some of the earlier managerial theories. Some of these theories included efficiency and lack of variation, consistency of production, and predictability. The idea behind all of this was, given a set of inputs, the goal was to maximize your outputs. At about the same time, a profoundly influential book was published called The Principles of Scientific Management by Frederick Winslow Taylor. Now, Taylor brought a scientific mentality to the task of studying work and was one of the first to create time and motion studies. Taylor studied how work was performed and how this affected worker productivity. Taylor had a philosophy that was focused on the belief that making people work as hard as they could was not ideal. Instead, Taylor advocated for optimizing the way work was done. In his book, Taylor proposed that by optimizing and simplifying jobs, productivity would increase. He also promoted the idea that workers and managers needed to cooperate with one another, which was about 180 degrees opposite the prevailing view. At that time, a factory manager had very little contact with workers, and he left them on their own to produce the necessary product. There was no standardization, and a worker's main motivation was often just continued employment. So there was no incentive to work as quickly or as efficiently as possible. Now, Taylor had a different idea. He believed that all workers were motivated by money. So he promoted the idea of a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. In other words, if a worker didn't achieve enough in a day, he didn't deserve to be paid as much as another worker who was highly productive. So, can you see how history is connected to today's theories? Sales compensation that we cover in this course is directly related to just what we've talked about. Now, Taylor was a mechanical engineer, and as I said, he was very interested in efficiency. He worked at a U.S. steel manufacturer, and he designed workplace experiments to determine optimal performance levels. In one example, he experimented with a shovel design until he had a design that would allow workers to shovel for several hours straight. With bricklayers, he experimented with various motions required and developed a very efficient way to lay bricks. These time and motion studies also led Taylor to conclude that certain people could work more efficiently than others. These were the people who managers should seek to hire when possible. Therefore, selecting the right people for the job was another important part of workplace efficiency. And again, here's another case where the things that we take for granted, like hiring practices, go back a long, long way. In some ways, the economy actually forced this. During this time, U.S. firms faced very little competition, and the focus was on efficiency and optimization. Knowledge began accumulating about what worked in organizational management. And what you are doing right now, gaining business education, can be tracked all the way back to 1881 with the founding of the first school of business, the Wharton School. A wealthy industrialist, Joseph Wharton, was the man behind this venerable institution, and it survives today.